The anticipation in the Sol system was electric. Every major city on Earth, from the neon-lit spires of New Tokyo to the domed metropolises of Mars, was alive with expectation. News channels buzzed with speculation, social media boiled with heated debates, and political leaders prepared speeches for what was to be the defining moment of humanity's place in the galaxy. The Zenith Council had finally responded. For nearly a century, Earth had worked tirelessly to prove its worth as a spacefaring civilization. With colonies scattered across the Sol system and fledgling outposts in nearby star systems, humanity had taken its first steps into the greater cosmos. They had studied alien technology, integrated themselves into interstellar trade, and painstakingly documented every criterion needed to join the Zenith Council, an alliance of the most advanced and civilized species in the known galaxy. That morning, the Council's decision arrived. It came not with a grand diplomatic visit or even a direct transmission, but through a cold, standardized document relayed by an automated courier drone. The message was brief, clinical, and devastating. Application denied. No explanation. No diplomatic pleasantries. Just a few attached paragraphs outlining the reasons in bureaucratic language so detached it may as well have been written by an AI. Humanity was deemed unfit for membership. Their technology was deemed too primitive, relying too much on unregulated experimentation instead of structured advancement. Their politics were labeled as unstable. Too many factions, too much ideological conflict, and a history riddled with war. Their culture was outright dismissed. The application review cited erratic emotional expression, excessive reliance on entertainment, humor, and chaotic creative thought processes as traits unfit for interstellar governance. And in a final note that stung more than anything, the Council concluded that humanity lacked the discipline to contribute meaningfully to an orderly galaxy. The world's reaction was immediate. News networks scrambled to translate the rejection. Politicians from every faction delivered speeches, some calling for immediate reapplication, others condemning the Council's arrogance. Public opinion fractured. Some despaired, seeing the rejection as proof that humanity was doomed to remain a second-class species. Others raged, arguing that the Council had never planned to let humanity in at all. But within hours of the decision, something else happened, something very human. Memes flooded the planetary network. Within minutes, the rejection notice was being dissected, ridiculed, and turned into viral jokes. Someone added a giant red rejected stamp over a picture of Earth, with the caption, "Too awesome for the snobs in space." Another popular post featured a fake council transcript where the alien representatives debated over humanity's dangerous levels of humor. And then came the response that truly mattered, the response that would change history. The turning point. Inside the orbital headquarters of the United Earth Initiative, a heated discussion unfolded. The top scientific minds, economic leaders, and military strategists had gathered to determine the path forward. President Elias Varon, the de facto leader of Earth's interstellar interests, stood at the head of the room, the Zenith Council's rejection message hovering in holographic form before him. "So," Varon said, letting the weight of the silence hang over the room, "they don't want us at their table. What do we do now?" "Reapply," said one of the diplomats immediately. "We adjust our policies, show them we can adhere to their standards." "No," interrupted Admiral Katrin de Silva, head of the newly formed Starfleet Command. "We don't beg." Her voice carried the weight of decades of military experience. "They've made their position clear. They don't respect us. And if we keep trying to prove ourselves on their terms, they never will. Their terms are designed to exclude us," added Dr. Leon Hayashi, lead researcher on human-alien technological integration. He tapped at his datapad, bringing up a comparative chart. "If you analyze the trends, every species they've admitted follows a pattern. Stable, slow-growing civilizations that develop in predictable ways. Humanity is the opposite. We adapt, we improvise, we innovate at speeds they can't understand. They don't get us, so they fear us." Varon's gaze swept across the room. He saw the truth of it in their faces. The rejection wasn't a fair evaluation. It was a dismissal. an attempt to shut humanity out before they could ever truly rise. Then we stop asking for a seat, Varen said finally, his voice quiet but firm. We build our own table. There was a pause. Then De Silva nodded. Agreed. Seconded, said Hayashi. The room erupted into a heated debate, not of if they should do it, but how. Within hours, the decision was made. Humanity would not beg for acceptance. It would create its own interstellar power. The birth of the disruptors. Plans were drafted at a breakneck pace. Earth would accelerate its expansion, establishing independent colonies beyond the Council's sphere of influence. Instead of conforming to established alien technologies, humanity would pursue radical new designs, combining Earth's own scientific breakthroughs with stolen or salvaged alien tech in unpredictable ways. They would rewrite the rules of trade, establishing a free market where anyone, human or alien, could participate without the Council's heavy-handed regulations. A new fleet doctrine would be developed, one focused not on brute strength, but on speed, unpredictability, and adaptability. And most importantly, they would create a society that thrived on innovation and defiance. This is going to piss them off, said Hayashi with a grin. Good, replied De Silva. It wasn't long before humanity's first independent fleets departed the Sol system, heading for the unclaimed edges of the galaxy. While the Council continued its business as usual, oblivious to the storm brewing at the fringes of known space, humanity was already laying the foundations of an empire unlike anything the universe had ever seen. They had been rejected. Now, they would make the galaxy regret it. The first ships left Sol in silence. There were no grand speeches, no public broadcasts, no symbolic farewells. The people aboard knew they weren't just leaving their home system. They were leaving behind the comfort of playing by someone else's rules. The Zenith Council had made it clear that humanity was unwanted. Now, humanity would do what it did best, turn rejection into revolution. These weren't government-sanctioned expeditions. The people leading this charge weren't career diplomats or bureaucrats who would have spent decades negotiating for a seat at the Council's table. They were pioneers, engineers, rogue scientists, ex-military officers, free market radicals, and outcasts who saw opportunity where others saw limits. They were humanity unleashed. The first wave of expansion pushed beyond the established trade routes and settled in sectors the Zenith Council had deemed unimportant. These were systems where no major species had claimed dominance, either because they were too resource-poor, too unstable, or too difficult to manage. To humanity, that simply meant prime real estate. They adapted quickly. Old shipyards were refitted into self-sustaining orbital platforms. Abandoned mining stations were repurposed into research hubs, and settlements on barren worlds were bolstered with hybrid technology that blended Earth's ingenuity with the best of stolen, salvaged, or black market alien tech. There were no universal laws, no central authority dictating progress. These frontier worlds became incubators for human ingenuity at a scale never seen before. One of the first major breakthroughs came from Outpost Helios, a rogue research station built into the shattered remains of an asteroid belt. Dr. Leon Hayashi, a former Zenith Council liaison-turned-exile, led a team of engineers experimenting with energy weapons. The Council's approach to ship-mounted weaponry was traditional: plasma cannons, directed energy beams, predictable energy yields. Hayashi's team did something reckless. They spliced alien energy technology with Earth's railgun platforms, something the Council's engineers had deemed impossible due to power stability issues. Within months, they produced the first functional plasma-accelerated railgun, a weapon capable of launching superheated rounds at relativistic speeds. A Council engineer would have spent decades perfecting the theory before attempting practical application. Hayashi's team built it, tested it, and improved it in under a year. Impossible isn't a real word, Hayashi had famously said during the prototype's first successful test. It just means they never tried. That became the unspoken motto of the frontier. Back in Sol, the United Earth initiative still played by traditional economic rules: trade agreements, regulated commerce, structured supply chains. The frontier did not. The The colonies developed an open market system unlike anything the Zenith Council had ever seen. Unlike the strictly controlled galactic economies that limited trade to approved corporate entities and centralized bureaucracies, the human frontier embraced free exchange without oversight. This was the birth of the Nexus markets. Using encrypted quantum networks, traders, smugglers, inventors, and investors conducted business without the Council's interference. Anyone, human or alien, could participate. If you had something valuable, you could trade it. If you needed something, you could buy it. There were no tariffs, no arbitrary restrictions. The result? An economic explosion. Formerly fringe species flocked to human-controlled trade hubs. Independent alien traders, tired of dealing with the Council's endless regulations, found new opportunity in human space. Even Council-aligned corporations began quietly engaging in black market deals, unable to resist the lure of unchecked profits. The Zenith Council scoffed at first, believing the system would collapse under its own weight. It didn't. It thrived, and with it, humanity grew richer and more powerful. It didn't take long for the Zenith Council to realize something was wrong. They had expected humanity to fade into irrelevance, crippled by their own instability. Instead, they were flourishing, and worse, they were spreading their influence to other species. Reports began filtering in. A council-sanctioned mining conglomerate reported losing business to human-operated facilities that provided faster service and cheaper materials. A military skirmish broke out on the fringes of council space when a mercenary fleet, using unknown hybrid technology, completely outmaneuvered a traditional Zenith warship. The Nexus markets were expanding, drawing more and more traders away from the Council's rigid economy. What had started as an insignificant offshoot of humanity was now an unregulated, chaotic, and undeniably effective alternative to the Council's status quo. They could no longer ignore it. 6 years after the rejection, the Zenith Council finally acknowledged humanity's growing power, not with diplomacy, but with a warning. A high-ranking emissary, Representative Varen of the Zenithri race, was sent to Outpost Helios, now one of humanity's most significant strongholds. It was meant to be a show of dominance, a reminder that the Council was still the ultimate power in the galaxy. It didn't go as planned. Varen arrived aboard a Council dreadnought, escorted by 24 warships. The message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an intimidation tactic. He demanded an immediate halt to the unregulated human expansion. He was met by Admiral Katrin de Silva, humanity's de facto military leader. Unlike the Council, she did not arrive with an escort fleet. She arrived alone, in a sleek, heavily modified human warship unlike anything the Council had seen before. She smiled as she met Varen on the Helios station's command deck. "You came all this way to give us a warning?" De Silva asked. "We came to remind you of your place," Varen said coldly. De Silva leaned forward, her expression amused. "You assume we have a place in your order. We don't. We never did." Varen's mandibles tightened. "If you continue this reckless expansion, the Council will have no choice but to—" De Silva cut him off with a wave of her hand. "We know what you think you'll do. The real question is, what do you think is going to happen when you try?" Varen hesitated. He had expected defiance, but not this. Not calculated defiance. Not the kind of confidence that only came from people who knew they had the upper hand. For the first time, he realized the truth. The Council wasn't dealing with a minor nuisance anymore. They were dealing with something new, something dangerous, something that had outgrown their control. De Silva smiled. "I'd advise your Council to start making room at the table, because soon you won't have a choice." The Zenith Council had dismissed humanity as chaotic, undisciplined, and reckless. Now, humanity had become the one thing they feared most: unpredictable. And as the Council debated its next move, humanity wasn't waiting. They were already preparing for the next step. A new kind of war was coming. And for the first time in history, the Council wouldn't be the ones dictating the terms. The Council still didn't understand. They had sent warnings. Humanity ignored them. They had deployed economic sanctions. Humanity built something better, They had dismissed the outposts on the fringes as unstable, doomed to collapse. Humanity turned them into the most prosperous and innovative regions in the galaxy. And now, the wild frontier wasn't just a human phenomenon. It was a movement. It started with a single space station, Nexus 1. Built in the ruins of a derelict alien megastructure, Nexus 1 wasn't just a marketplace. It was a statement. No tariffs, no licensing fees, no artificial supply controls dictated by a central government. If you had something to sell, you could sell it. If you had an idea, you could fund it. If you wanted to experiment with technology the council had deemed illegal, you could build it here. It was an economic revolution, and it worked. Within a decade, Nexus 1 had grown into a thriving hub for traders, inventors, smugglers, and discontented council citizens looking for opportunities they would never get under the council's slow-moving bureaucracy. And Nexus 1 wasn't alone. New trade hubs popped up across the wild frontier. Nexus Prime, Freeport Sigma, Helios Exchange, each larger and more influential than the last. These weren't just human-controlled ports. They were melting pots, attracting thousands of species who wanted an alternative to the stagnant Zenith economy. The Council's worst nightmare had come true. Humanity had rewritten the rules of interstellar trade, and everyone wanted in. The wild frontier wasn't just an economic force. It was a scientific revolution in real time. On Council-controlled worlds, technological progress was slow, carefully managed to avoid disruptive advancements. On the frontier, disruptive was the goal. Every major research hub on the frontier had one unifying principle: no restrictions. On Outpost Helios, genetic engineers experimented with hybrid DNA splicing, producing new breeds of bioengineered creatures adapted for deep space survival. On Darkstream Labs, cybernetic researchers pushed past the limits of biological augmentation, integrating AI consciousness into human minds, something the Council had banned centuries ago. On Nova Forge shipyards, rogue engineers developed modular warships, ships that could be rebuilt mid-battle using self-adapting nanotech, an innovation the Council's rigid design philosophy had never even considered. The result? Humanity's technology wasn't just catching up. It was surpassing the Council's in ways they couldn't comprehend. And the worst part? They couldn't stop it. The Zenith Council tried. They issued warnings. They imposed new trade regulations. They attempted to blacklist human technology from Council-aligned worlds. It didn't work, because while the Council still tried to control innovation, humanity had figured out a simple truth. Ideas don't need permission to spread. And spread they did. Council scientists secretly purchased human research data under fake credentials. Alien corporations began hiring human engineers to consult on restricted projects. Entire colonies defected to human-controlled space, choosing progress over stagnation. And so, the Council did what it always did when faced with something beyond its control. It tried to erase the problem. They didn't attack directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, the Council quietly funded mercenary groups to strike key human-controlled locations. The first attack came at Freeport Sigma, one of the fastest-growing trade hubs. A fleet of mercenary warships, paid off by Council interests, emerged from hyperspace and opened fire without warning. They expected an easy victory. They assumed humanity's defense fleets were uncoordinated, poorly trained, and technologically inferior. They were wrong. Freeport Sigma's defenses activated instantly. The mercenaries faced a fleet that fought like nothing they had ever encountered. Human warships didn't follow conventional battle doctrine. Instead of engaging in slow, methodical maneuvers, they swarmed unpredictably. Instead of relying on static defenses, they used modular weapon systems that reconfigured mid-battle. Instead of retreating when damaged, human ships adapted on the fly, rerouting power, patching hull breaches, shifting strategies within seconds. The battle that was supposed to be an easy victory turned into a slaughter. The Council's mercenaries were wiped out. Not a single warship escaped, and humanity sent a message to the Zenith Council. Try that again, and it won't just be mercenaries we fight. With each failed attempt to control humanity's expansion, the balance of power shifted further. The Council had the larger fleets, but they were outdated. The Council had the economic influence, but the Nexus markets were overtaking them. The Council had the laws, but no one was following them anymore. For the first time in galactic history, a species was rising outside the Council's control and winning. What the Council once dismissed as human recklessness was now being recognized as human adaptability. What they once called chaos was now being understood as innovation. And the Council was running out of time, because humanity wasn't just disrupting the status quo anymore. They were building something better. And soon, the Council would be faced with a choice: adapt or be left behind. The Zenith Council had always believed warfare to be an exact science. It followed strict doctrines built upon centuries of calculated strategy and slow, methodical technological refinement. Battles were fought like chess games, orderly, predictable, and controlled. Humanity changed that. The first real war between the Council and humanity didn't begin with an official declaration. It started with a single act of defiance that shattered everything the Council thought they knew about war. And it began at Epsilon Eridani. The Zenith Council had had enough. Humanity's influence was spreading too fast. The free trade hubs were siphoning more and more business away from the Council's carefully regulated economy. Human technology, unrestricted, experimental, dangerous, was beginning to challenge the Council's most advanced systems. And worst of all, other species were noticing. If the Council didn't act now, humanity's way of doing things, unregulated innovation, decentralized trade, unpredictable warfare, would spread. So the Council chose the most direct solution: military force. They targeted Epsilon Eridani, a human-controlled system that had grown into a crucial logistics hub between the Nexus markets and the inner colonies. If they could seize it, they could cut humanity's expansion off at the knees. The Council sent Fleet Prime, one of its most powerful battle groups, 2 dreadnoughts, 5 cruisers, a dozen frigates, and enough firepower to erase a planet's defenses. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they got annihilated. The battle began as the Council expected. Their fleet dropped out of hyperspace in formation, weapons powered and shields raised. They sent their demand: surrender Epsilon Eridani or be destroyed. No response. The Council fleet moved in, expecting to meet resistance from a handful of outgunned human warships. Instead, they were met with nothing. There were no human warships in standard defensive positions. No battle lines, no formation. Just silence. Then, suddenly, the ambush began. Human warships, smaller and faster than anything the Council had designed, erupted from hidden positions within Epsilon Eridani's asteroid belts. They didn't attack conventionally. They struck from every direction at once. Council warships, built for large-scale fleet engagements, struggled to adapt. Their weapons were designed for long-range, calculated exchanges, not rapid, unpredictable dogfights. The human fleet didn't fight like a traditional military. They fought like raiders, like hunters. They used AI-coordinated formations that changed in real time. They hacked enemy targeting systems mid-battle, making Council gunners fire on their own ships. They deployed modular warships, altering their weapon systems mid-fight to counter the enemy's weaknesses. And worst of all, they fought with reckless creativity. Council ships, for all their advanced technology, relied on predictability. Human pilots did things no sane officer would consider. One human captain rammed his Corvette into a Council frigate, ejecting at the last moment while his ship detonated with an experimental fusion bomb. Another human destroyer faked a reactor breach, causing a Council cruiser to divert right into a hidden minefield. A squadron of human starfighters used the debris of destroyed ships as cover, weaving through wreckage at impossible speeds, using the battlefield itself as a weapon. The Council fleet never had a chance. The battle, expected to last hours, was over in 37 minutes. Humanity's losses were minimal. The entire Council fleet was destroyed. The message was clear. The old rules of war no longer applied. The Battle of Epsilon Eridani changed everything. The Council had never lost a battle like this before. It wasn't just a defeat. It was an embarrassment. For centuries, they had believed their military doctrine to be unshakable, their fleets invincible. They had assumed humanity, for all its rapid growth, was still a minor power. Now, the entire galaxy knew the truth. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was winning, and the Council had no idea how to stop them. In the aftermath of Epsilon Eridani, the Council could not afford to lose another open battle. So they changed tactics. Instead of direct confrontation, they turned to subterfuge, sabotage, and political manipulation. They deployed spies to infiltrate human research hubs, attempting to steal the very technology they had once dismissed. They funded insurgents, hoping to turn human colonies against each other. They used diplomacy, trying to isolate humanity by convincing other species to cut ties with them. It was a war fought in shadows, in whispered deals and unseen betrayals. And humanity? They adapted. They built counterintelligence networks that outmaneuvered the Council's spies. They hired defectors from Council-aligned worlds, turning former enemies into allies. They exposed the Council's underhanded tactics in the Nexus markets, turning public opinion against them. And when necessary, they fought fire with fire. Human covert ops teams hacked Council databanks, stealing critical intelligence. They used misinformation, feeding false reports to the Council to lure their fleets into ambushes. They hunted down the Council's most valuable assets, eliminating them before they could strike. It was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a war for the future of the galaxy. The Council had one final move, a desperate attempt to regain control. They gathered their largest fleet in history. Every remaining warship, every reserve force, every last bit of strength they could muster. Their target? Nexus Prime, the heart of the free trade network. If they could destroy it, they could cripple humanity's growing empire. It would be the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen, and the Council was prepared to do whatever it took to win. They thought they were ready. They thought they had learned from their mistakes. They were wrong, because humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they were rejected. And when the Council's fleets arrived, they would face a force unlike anything they had ever imagined. The war was about to reach its climax, and humanity was ready to change the galaxy forever. The Zenith Council had made its choice. They had gathered their largest fleet in history, pooling together the might of every species loyal to their rule. Hundreds of warships, from battlecruisers to planetary siege vessels, assembled for a single purpose: crush humanity before it was too late. Their target was Nexus Prime, the economic and technological heart of the free trade network. If they succeeded, they could sever humanity's growing influence. If they failed, they wouldn't get another chance. This was humanity's greatest test. And the moment the Council's fleet arrived, they knew. They were walking into a trap. The Council's war doctrine was simple: overwhelming force. Their fleet, over 1,000 ships strong, emerged from hyperspace around Nexus Prime, weapons charged, expecting a decisive first strike. But instead of meeting a human defense fleet, they found empty space. No battle lines, no defensive formations, just silence, and then chaos. The human fleet didn't fight fair. They didn't meet the Council in a standard engagement. Instead, they let the battlefield fight for them. The moment the Council entered the system, their ships encountered a minefield unlike anything they had ever seen. Smart mines, AI-driven weapons that adapted to enemy movement, calculating weak points before detonating. The first 100 Council ships never even made it into formation before they were torn apart. And then, from the asteroid belts surrounding Nexus Prime, the real battle began. Human warships emerged from hiding, smaller and faster than their Council counterparts, striking from every angle at once. The battle wasn't fought like a war. It was fought like an ambush, 1,000 times over. Council ships struggled to adjust. Their rigid formations, designed for large-scale fleet engagements, meant nothing in the face of unpredictable hit-and-run tactics. Humanity fought like a living organism, their fleet shifting in real time. AI-coordinated swarm ships harassed dreadnoughts, hacking enemy targeting systems before disappearing into the void. Meanwhile, Human warships adapted mid-battle. Their modular systems allowed them to shift weapons configurations on the fly, turning support ships into missile platforms, scout ships into bombers, destroyers into electronic warfare vessels. And at the heart of it all, Nexus Prime's planetary defenses. The Council thought they were attacking a trade hub. They were attacking a fortress. Orbital railguns fired at relativistic speeds, cutting through enemy shields as if they weren't even there. Gravitic disruptors, an experimental human-alien hybrid weapon, disabled Council engines mid-battle, leaving them defenseless. And in the final blow, humanity unleashed its most dangerous technology yet, the phased disruptor fleet. These weren't ordinary ships. They were theoretical prototypes designed by rogue scientists on the frontier. They bent space around them, allowing them to phase in and out of real-time combat, making them untouchable 1 second and striking with devastating force the next. The Council had come with 1,000 warships. They left with less than 200. Humanity didn't just win the battle. They broke the Zenith Council's illusion of control. And across the galaxy, everyone was watching. The defeat at Nexus Prime sent shockwaves through the entire galactic order. For centuries, the Council had ruled with unchallenged authority. They had decided which species rose and which species fell. Now, that illusion was shattered, and the cracks spread fast. First, the corporations. For decades, the largest trade conglomerates had obeyed the Council's strict regulations. But now, the Nexus markets were the dominant economic force. Why follow the Council's outdated bureaucracy when they could thrive under humanity's free trade system? One by one, corporations defected. Then the outer worlds, entire colonies that had once been forced under Council control, now saw a better alternative. They saw a future where they weren't ruled by stagnation, but by innovation. Planetary governors switched allegiances overnight. And then, the Council's own military fractured. High-ranking admirals, humiliated by the defeat at Nexus Prime, began questioning their orders. Some went rogue, defecting to humanity's side. Others vanished, taking their fleets into unaligned space, refusing to fight a war they no longer believed in. The Council, once the unquestioned authority of the galaxy, was now on the brink of collapse. And humanity? They had become the dominant force in the galaxy, without ever needing the Council's approval. The Zenith Council was out of time. They could no longer suppress humanity's rise. They could no longer dictate the future of the galaxy. They had two options. Option 1, war. A last-ditch, all-out conflict, one they knew they couldn't win. Or Option 2, accept humanity, but it wouldn't be on their terms. Humanity wouldn't join as subordinates. They wouldn't conform to the old rules. If the Council wanted to survive, they had to change. And so, for the first time in its history, the Zenith Council did something unthinkable. They called for peace. A summit was organized, the first ever to be held on human terms. It wasn't held in the Council's grand halls. It wasn't dictated by their traditions. It was held on Nexus Prime. And humanity didn't arrive as a hopeful petitioner. They arrived as the dominant power. The message was clear. The old era was over. The new order had begun. For centuries, the Zenith Council had dictated the course of history. They decided which species were worthy. They controlled trade, technology, and war. They were the galaxy's undisputed authority. Now, they were guests in a chamber built by those they had rejected. The Council delegation stood in the Grand Hall of Nexus Prime, surrounded by humanity's greatest minds, military leaders, and economic pioneers. Not as rulers, not as judges, but as equals, if they were lucky. For the first time in history, the Council wasn't the one setting the terms. Humanity was. The summit chamber was filled with powerful figures from across the galaxy. Seated in the center were the 5 remaining High Chancellors of the Zenith Council, their once proud robes now symbols of a government in decline. Facing them were humanity's leaders. President Elias Varon, the political architect of humanity's rise. Admiral Katrin de Silva, the warrior who had shattered the Council's fleets. Dr. Leon Hayashi, the rogue scientist who had turned human ingenuity into a technological revolution. a delegation of alien defectors, former council-aligned species who had thrown in their lot with humanity, tired of living under stagnation. The air was thick with tension. The council had requested this meeting to negotiate peace. But humanity wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to deliver an ultimatum. Chancellor Varen, a veteran of the council's diplomatic corps, spoke first. "We recognize that mistakes were made," he said carefully, his mandibles clicking. "The council misjudged humanity. We acknowledge that." Silence. Across the table, Admiral de Silva leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. And Varen exhaled sharply. "And we believe it is in the best interests of all species to find common ground. We wish to offer humanity a seat in the Zenith Council as a full member." The words hung in the air. There it was. The offer humanity had been denied generations ago. They were finally being invited to join. But it was too late. President Varen folded his hands. His voice was calm, but unshakable. "Chancellor," he said, "the council is no longer in a position to offer anything." Varen flinched. "What? You misunderstand your position," Varen continued. "You didn't come here to grant us a seat at your table." He leaned forward. "You came here because you're afraid you won't have a table at all." Silence. The words landed like a shockwave. Varen continued, his voice steady. "For centuries, the Zenith Council controlled the galaxy. You dictated who was allowed to thrive, who was allowed to advance, who was allowed to matter." He gestured around them. "This station, this movement, is proof that you failed." He stood, looking at each chancellor in turn. "You didn't keep the peace. You didn't advance civilization. You held it back." His words were a death sentence for the old order. "The galaxy no longer follows the Zenith Council." He stepped forward. "It follows us." Varen's composure cracked. You're suggesting the council should dissolve itself?" Varen smiled. "No." He turned to the gathered alien leaders, the defectors, the free traders, the outcasts who had built this new world alongside humanity. "We're telling you that it already has." The council had come expecting negotiations. Instead, they were given a choice. Join the new galactic order not as rulers, but as equals, or resist and be left behind forever. There was no third option. Humanity wasn't here to ask for permission. They weren't here to beg for a seat. They had already built something better, and the rest of the galaxy had followed. Varen's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "What are your terms?" Varen sat back down. Now, they were getting somewhere. The terms were simple. The Zenith Council would dismantle its monopoly on trade and technology. All species, human and alien, would have equal access to innovation and progress. The outdated bureaucratic system that had slowed down the galaxy's advancement would be abolished. A new interstellar alliance would form, one that valued freedom, innovation, and adaptability over stagnation and control. It was not a request. It was the future, and the Council had no choice but to accept. A decision was made that day, one that would be remembered for centuries. The Zenith Council signed the agreement, officially recognizing the new order of the galaxy. The news spread instantly. On Council homeworlds, the old institutions crumbled overnight. The bureaucrats who had hoarded power found themselves obsolete. On Nexus Prime, the free market economy that had already overtaken the Council's influence became the dominant economic force in the galaxy. And across the stars, species that had once been trapped under Council rule were finally free to choose their own path. The old order was dead, and humanity had led the charge into a new era, a future without limits. As the summit ended, Admiral de Silva stood beside President Varen, watching the Council delegation leave. She smirked. They never saw it coming. Varen chuckled. They never wanted to see it coming. Hayashi joined them, datapad in hand. "We just made history." "No," Varen corrected, gazing at the stars beyond the station's windows. "We just made the future." The Zenith Council was gone. In its place, a new alliance rose, one built not on control, but on progress, adaptation, and innovation. Humanity, once rejected as primitive and chaotic, had redefined what it meant to be a galactic power. The age of controlled stagnation was over. The age of limitless possibility had begun. And as humanity expanded ever further into the void, one truth became undeniable. The future no longer belonged to those who sought control. It belonged to those who dared to create. The Zenith Council was no more. The summit at Nexus Prime had not just been a diplomatic meeting. It had been the defining moment of a new era. The once mighty rulers of the galaxy had bowed to reality. Their authority was irrelevant. Their influence had crumbled, and in the void they left behind, humanity rose. But this was not an empire forged through conquest. It was not a government built on control. It was something far more dangerous. It was freedom. With the Council gone, the galaxy did not fall into chaos. Instead, it thrived. The Free Galactic Coalition, a decentralized network of independent worlds, trade hubs, and pioneering civilizations, formed in the wake of the Old Order. Its foundation was simple. No single race ruled over another. No bureaucracy decided the fate of progress. No limits were placed on science, trade, or exploration. It was not an empire. It was a revolution in how civilizations coexisted. Some species embraced it immediately, eager to shed the Council's suffocating restrictions. Others resisted, but resistance was futile. The Council's remaining warlords tried to rally, to reclaim power through force. They were crushed, not by a centralized human fleet, but by 100 independent groups, each armed with cutting-edge technology and battlefield tactics that no military in history had ever anticipated. This was humanity's greatest strength. They had not just fought the old way of thinking. They had rewritten it. With the old structure gone, new players emerged, each more ambitious and unpredictable than anything the Council had ever allowed. The Nexus Trade Union. What had started as black market trade hubs had now evolved into the single largest economy in galactic history. The Nexus markets set prices, not through bureaucratic control, but through true supply and demand. Entire species abandoned their traditional economies to integrate with Nexus trading, and for the first time, innovation was driven by those who created, not those who controlled. The Independent Research Consortium. The most brilliant minds, human and alien, gathered in new research hubs unrestricted by outdated regulations. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, faster-than-light travel, all barriers that the Council had once forbidden were now being shattered. Some experiments failed. Others redefined existence itself. The first quantum phase starship, capable of phasing between realities, was tested within a decade of the Council's fall. The Free Defense Initiative. With no central military ruling over them, independent fleets formed to protect free worlds against any would-be conquerors. It was not an army. It was an evolving force, a coalition of adaptive AI warships, guerrilla strike teams, cybernetic tacticians, and mercenary fleets that could coordinate with each other in real time. No enemy, no empire, no ancient power could match them, because they weren't an empire. They were something new. They were unpredictable, and that made them unstoppable. Despite being the catalyst for change, humanity did not claim dominance. They never wanted to rule. They simply wanted to create. Some humans returned to Sol, content with their newfound place in history. Others became pioneers, diplomats, engineers, and explorers, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And some, like Admiral Katrin de Silva, Dr. Leon Hayashi, and President Elias Varon, became legends, their names spoken across the stars as the architects of a future no one had ever imagined. But humanity's greatest achievement was not their military, their economy, or even their technology. It was that they had given the galaxy a choice. For the first time in history, civilizations were truly free to decide their own destinies. And with that freedom, the galaxy changed faster than anyone could have predicted. With the fall of the Zenith Council, a new frontier emerged. The coalition had no borders because borders no longer mattered. Exploration surged to unprecedented levels. Humanity and its allies ventured into the farthest reaches of the void, uncovering ancient artifacts, new dimensions of physics, and mysteries that the old Council had been too afraid to touch. What lay beyond? Artificial intelligences that had outlived their creators, waiting in the darkness. Biological entities that existed beyond time. Entire civilizations, hidden for millennia, watching as the new galaxy unfolded. Humanity had disrupted everything, and they were just getting started. Years after the summit at Nexus Prime, a final message was sent from Earth to the stars. It was not a declaration of power. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. To every species, every outcast, every dreamer who had once been told that progress had limits. It simply read, "The future belongs to those who create it. Join us." And across the galaxy, from the ruins of ancient worlds to the newborn colonies in the deepest void, they did. The old galaxy was gone. This was a new era, an era where order was not imposed. It was discovered. An era where technology was not controlled. It was shared. An era where the bold, the reckless, the dreamers, and the innovators would shape the stars themselves. And at the heart of it all, humanity, the species that had been rejected, the species that had been underestimated, the species that had rewritten the galaxy. Somewhere in a distant system, a ship unlike anything ever seen before prepared for its first voyage. It was not a warship. It was not a colony vessel. It was something new, designed with the most advanced hybrid technology in existence. It was built for one purpose: to go where no civilization had ever gone before, to break past the last frontier, to venture beyond the limits of known space, into the unknown. As its engines activated, as the countdown began, as the ship prepared to make its first impossible jump, a single phrase was transmitted across the stars. A phrase that had become the defining legacy of humanity's rise. Let's see what's out there. And with that, humanity leapt into the next great adventure. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as creators of the future.